The succession crisis, when empire nearly collapsed. The death of the young king. In the cold pre-dawn hours of a spring morning in 1427, when the sacred fires of Tenochtitlan flickered low in the temple mayor and the city's canals reflected nothing but shadows and whispered fears, the lifeless body of Huey Talatoni Chimalpopoca was discovered in his private chambers, strangled with a cord of maguey fiber in what appeared to be a diplomatic meeting but was in reality a carefully orchestrated assassination that would plunge the Mexica people into their greatest constitutional crisis and threaten to destroy the delicate political arrangements that had enabled their survival as tributaries under the dominant Tepanec Empire of Azcapotzalco. The 23-year-old ruler whose name meant smoking shield had reigned for only 13 years, ascending to supreme authority as a mere child of 10 when his predecessor Huitzilihuitl died, leaving behind a complex web of political obligations, military commitments, and tributary relationships that required extraordinary diplomatic skill to navigate, while the young king lacked both the experience and the political support necessary for managing the increasingly dangerous tensions between Mexica aspirations and Tepanec domination. The assassination itself bore all the hallmarks of Maxtla's ruthless political methodology, the ambitious new ruler of Azcapotzalco, who had recently consolidated his authority through systematic elimination of potential rivals while expanding Tepanec territorial control and increasing tribute demands upon subordinates, communities throughout the Valley of Mexico in ways that threatened the delicate balance of power that had previously enabled smaller city-states to maintain limited autonomy within the imperial framework. The discovery of Chimalpopoca's body created immediate shockwaves throughout Tenochtitlan as the implications of royal assassination became clear to both the nobility and common citizens, who understood that their community now faced existential threats from multiple directions, potential military retaliation from Azcapotzalco that could result in complete destruction, internal political fragmentation that might prevent effective resistance to external pressure, and the complex challenge of selecting new leadership during conditions of maximum stress and uncertainty. The constitutional mechanisms that governed royal succession had never been tested under such extreme circumstances, as previous transitions of imperial authority had occurred through natural death or voluntary abdication rather than violent elimination by foreign enemies, creating unprecedented challenges for the electoral procedures and institutional frameworks that normally provided stability and continuity during dynastic transitions, while ensuring that legitimate authority could be transferred smoothly between generations of qualified rulers. The immediate security measures implemented following discovery of the assassination included closure of all causeway access to the island city, while armed guards were posted at strategic locations throughout Tenochtitlan to prevent potential Tepanec infiltration or attack that might exploit the temporary leadership vacuum and internal confusion created by sudden loss of central authority during a period when unified command was essential for community survival and effective response to external threats. The emergency council sessions that convened throughout the first day after Chimalpopoca's death included hasty consultations between surviving members of the imperial family, military commanders whose loyalty would be crucial for any future resistance efforts, and religious leaders whose spiritual authority was necessary for legitimizing whatever political decisions might emerge from the crisis, while maintaining divine sanction for imperial authority during extraordinarily challenging circumstances. The intelligence reports that reached Tenochtitlan during the initial hours of crisis confirmed fears that Maxtla was already mobilizing military forces for potential operations against Mexica territories, while simultaneously conducting diplomatic initiatives designed to isolate Tenochtitlan from potential allies and tributary communities whose support would be essential for successful resistance to Tepanec military pressure and political domination. The strategic assessment that emerged from emergency planning sessions revealed the desperate nature of Mexica's circumstances: military forces that were inadequate for direct confrontation with Tepanec armies, financial resources depleted by increasing tribute obligations and recent military expenditures, and diplomatic isolation that left few options for external assistance during a crisis that would determine whether the Mexica community could survive as an independent political entity. The factional divisions that had remained largely dormant during Chimalpopoca's reign suddenly erupted into open political competition as different groups within Mexica society advocated radically different responses to the crisis while pursuing their own interests and attempting to position themselves advantageously for whatever political arrangements might emerge from the constitutional decision-making process that would determine the community's future leadership and strategic direction. The religious dimensions of the succession crisis included concerns about maintaining divine favor and cosmic sanction for imperial authority while ensuring that proper ceremonial procedures were followed despite time pressures and security constraints that complicated normal ritual observances and threatened to compromise the spiritual legitimacy that was essential for effective political leadership in Mesoamerican governmental systems. The foreign intelligence operations that monitored Mexica internal developments included Tepanex spies and diplomatic agents whose reports to Maxtla would influence his strategic calculations regarding appropriate responses to the succession crisis, while other regional powers evaluated opportunities and threats that might result from potential changes in Mexica leadership and political orientation that could affect broader balance of power throughout the Valley of Mexico. The constitutional framework under pressure, the electoral system that governed Mexico royal succession, represented one of the most sophisticated constitutional arrangements in Mesoamerica, combining democratic consultation with aristocratic authority while ensuring that supreme power could be transferred legitimately between qualified candidates whose capabilities and character had been tested through military service, administrative experience, and religious dedication that demonstrated their fitness for the awesome responsibilities of imperial leadership. The Electoral College that possessed constitutional authority for selecting new rulers included representatives from the major Calpulli clan groups that comprised Mexica society, military commanders whose expertise was essential for evaluating candidates' strategic capabilities, religious leaders whose spiritual authority was necessary for divine sanction of political decisions, and respected elders whose wisdom and experience could guide complex deliberations during extraordinary circumstances requiring careful judgment and diplomatic skill. The qualification requirements that determined eligible candidates for imperial succession included demonstration of military prowess through successful combat leadership, administrative competence proven through governance of subordinate territories or management of complex projects, religious knowledge sufficient for proper ceremonial performance and divine communication, and personal character that could command respect and loyalty from diverse constituencies within Mexica society and allied communities. The deliberation procedures that structured electoral decision-making included systematic evaluation of candidate qualifications, careful consideration of political circumstances and strategic requirements that would face the new ruler, consultation with divine authorities through ceremonial activities and prophetic guidance, and comprehensive discussion of policy alternatives and strategic options that would determine the community's survival and future prosperity. The consensus-building mechanisms that enabled effective collective decision-making despite competing interests and urgent time pressures included traditional protocols for managing disagreement and facilitating compromise while ensuring that final decisions reflected genuine community support rather than mere factional dominance that could undermine political legitimacy and create ongoing internal conflicts during periods requiring maximum unity and coordination. The emergency procedures that adapted normal electoral processes to crisis conditions included expedited consultation methods and abbreviated ceremonial requirements, while maintaining essential constitutional principles and spiritual observances that validated political authority and ensured continuity of legitimate governance despite external pressures and internal divisions that threatened to fragment Mexica's political unity and collective resolve. The constitutional safeguards that protected electoral integrity during times of stress included traditional prohibitions against foreign interference and factional manipulation, while ensuring that candidate selection reflected genuine merit and community interest rather than external pressure or eternal corruption that could compromise the quality of leadership and strategic decision-making essential for community survival and prosperity. The spiritual authorization protocols that connected political decisions to divine will included ceremonial consultation with patron deities and cosmic forces while seeking prophetic guidance regarding appropriate leadership choices and strategic directions that would maintain divine favor and cosmic sanction for Mexico political authority during extraordinary challenges requiring supernatural assistance and spiritual protection. The documentation procedures that preserved records of electoral decisions and constitutional precedents included maintenance of historical accounts and legal precedents, while creating institutional memory that could guide future succession crises and constitutional challenges through preservation of successful practices and careful analysis of decision-making processes that had proven effective during previous periods of political stress. The legitimacy validation mechanisms that confirmed popular acceptance of electoral decisions included public ceremonies and community ratification, while ensuring that new leadership possessed genuine support and moral authority necessary for effective governance during challenging circumstances requiring high levels of social cooperation and collective commitment to shared objectives and strategic priorities. The international recognition protocols that established new rulers' authority and diplomatic relationships included ceremonial communications with allied and tributary communities while securing acknowledgement of legitimate succession from foreign powers whose cooperation would be essential for successful implementation of policy decisions and strategic initiatives requiring external support or accommodation. The continuity assurance measures that preserved governmental effectiveness during leadership transitions included temporary administrative arrangements and institutional procedures while ensuring that essential services and strategic operations could continue uninterrupted despite changes in supreme authority that might otherwise create opportunities for enemies to exploit governmental disruption and political confusion. The factions emerge. The conservative faction that advocated accommodation, Boadas Bible that Haviga commutes a mighty extrentis evil, instillplibid faction that advocated accommodation, Boadas Bible that Haviga commutis pologista faking embertipiotabel, instillplible that Haviga commutis Bible 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 that Haviga with Tepanek authority included established nobles whose wealth and status depended upon maintaining existing tributary relationships, while arguing that direct confrontation with Azcapotzalco would result in catastrophic military defeat and complete destruction of Mexica. Political independence was Unicana prosperity and cultural traditions that had been carefully preserved through decades of diplomatic maneuvering and tribute payments. The accommodation party's leadership included senior nobles who had served as administrators and diplomatic representatives during previous reigns while possessing detailed knowledge of Tepanek military capabilities, political intentions, and negotiating positions that informed their assessment of Mexico's strategic options and influenced their conviction that survival required continued submission to superior Tepanek power rather than suicidal resistance against overwhelming odds. The conservative strategic analysis that supported continued tributary status included realistic assessment of military balance between Mexica forces and Tepanek armies, while recognizing that Tenochtitlan's island location provided some defensive advantages but could not compensate for fundamental disparities in manpower, resources, and military technology that would determine outcomes of any direct military confrontation between competing political authorities. The diplomatic arguments advanced by accommodation advocates included emphasis on historical precedents for successful tributary relationships and peaceful coexistence, while pointing to benefits that Mexica communities had received through participation in broader Tepanek commercial networks and military alliances that provided security and economic opportunities despite political subordination and tribute obligations. The risk assessment calculations that informed conservative positions included analysis of potential consequences from unsuccessful resistance efforts while emphasizing dangers of complete annihilation, population enslavement, and territorial occupation that could result from failed military campaigns against superior enemies whose victory would eliminate any possibility for future political recovery or cultural survival. The resistance faction that advocated armed rebellion against Tepanek domination included younger military leaders whose ambitions were constrained by tributary relationships, while arguing that Maxtla's increasingly aggressive policies and assassination of legitimate rulers demonstrated that accommodation strategies were inadequate for ensuring long-term survival and community prosperity under conditions of escalating oppression and territorial expansion. The militant party's leadership centered around Itzcoatl, Chimalpopoca's uncle, and an experienced military commander who had observed Tepanek internal weaknesses during decades of military service while developing strategic relationships with other tributary communities that shared resentments against Azcapotzalco's domination and might be willing to join coordinated resistance efforts against common enemies. The resistance strategic analysis that supported armed rebellion included recognition of Tepanek vulnerabilities and overextension while identifying opportunities for alliance building with other oppressed communities whose combined military capabilities could challenge Azcapotzalco's regional hegemony through coordinated campaigns and mutual support that would prevent Maxtla from concentrating overwhelming force against individual rebellious territories. The military arguments advanced by resistance advocates included assessment of Mexica's defensive advantages and warrior capabilities, while emphasizing potential for successful guerrilla warfare and prolonged resistance that could inflict sufficient casualties and economic costs to force Tepanek recognition of Mexica independence, or at least negotiation of more favorable tributary arrangements that preserved greater autonomy and reduced tribute burdens. The alliance-building opportunities identified by resistance strategists included potential partnerships with Texcoco, whose legitimate ruler Nezahualcoyotl had been displaced by Tepanec aggression while possessing strong claims to regional leadership and sophisticated understanding of coalition warfare that could coordinate multi-community resistance efforts against Azcapotzalco's imperial pretensions and territorial expansion. The moderate faction that sought middle ground between accommodation and resistance included pragmatic nobles who recognized both the dangers of submission, the risks of confrontation while advocating diplomatic initiatives and conditional cooperation that might preserve Mexica autonomy through skilled negotiation and strategic flexibility rather than committing irreversibly to either complete submission or total warfare. The moderate strategic approach emphasized diplomatic creativity and political maneuvering while seeking to exploit divisions within Tepanec leadership and changing regional circumstances that might create opportunities for enhancing Mexica independence without provoking devastating military retaliation that could destroy community survival and eliminate future political possibilities through premature confrontation with superior enemies. The electoral crisis. The procedural challenges that confronted the Electoral College included unprecedented time pressures and security constraints that complicated normal deliberative processes, while external military threats and internal factional divisions created conditions that tested constitutional frameworks beyond their original design parameters and required creative adaptation of traditional procedures to extraordinary circumstances threatening community survival. The candidate evaluation difficulties that emerged during crisis deliberations included limited time for comprehensive assessment of qualifications and capabilities, while competing factional pressures and propaganda campaigns distorted information about candidate strengths and weaknesses in ways that complicated objective analysis of leadership potential and strategic competence essential for successful navigation of existential challenges. The security concerns that affected electoral proceedings included potential Tepanec infiltration and intelligence gathering, while risks of assassination or intimidation created needs for protective measures that could interfere with traditional consultation procedures and open debate that normally characterized democratic aspects of Mexica's succession practices and constitutional decision-making processes. The legitimacy questions that arose during irregular electoral conditions included debates about procedural validity and constitutional authority, while concerns about foreign pressure and factional manipulation created doubts about whether decisions made under crisis circumstances could possess sufficient moral and legal authority for effective governance during challenging periods requiring maximum popular support and social unity. The information warfare campaigns that sought to influence electoral outcomes included competing narratives about strategic alternatives and candidate qualifications, while factional propaganda and foreign disinformation created confusion about actual circumstances and policy options that complicated rational decision-making and threatened to undermine quality of leadership selection during critical historical moments. The religious consultation difficulties that affected spiritual authorization procedures included limited time for proper ceremonial observances and divine communication, while crisis conditions interfered with normal ritual requirements and prophetic guidance that traditionally validated political decisions and ensured cosmic sanction for imperial authority during succession transitions. The popular participation challenges that limited community involvement in electoral processes included security restrictions and time constraints that prevented normal consultation with Calpulli representatives, while concerns about foreign retaliation created pressures for secrecy that conflicted with democratic traditions and transparency requirements that strengthened legitimacy of constitutional decisions. The coalition-building complications that affected factional negotiations included fundamental disagreements about strategic direction and policy priorities, while competing personal ambitions and conflicting loyalties created obstacles to consensus formation and compromise arrangements that normally enabled effective collective decision-making despite diverse interests and competing perspectives within Electoral College membership. The diplomatic pressure tactics employed by external powers to influence succession decisions included implied threats and promised rewards, while Tepanec intelligence operations and propaganda campaigns sought to promote candidates who would maintain tributary relationships and prevent emergence of leadership committed to resistance policies that could threaten Azcapotzalco's regional hegemony and territorial control. The institutional adaptation requirements that enabled constitutional function under extraordinary circumstances included development of emergency procedures and abbreviated protocols, while maintaining essential democratic principles and spiritual observances that preserved legitimacy and effectiveness of governmental transitions despite crisis conditions that tested fundamental assumptions underlying traditional political arrangements. The decision deadlock problems that threatened to prevent timely leadership selection included irreconcilable differences between major factions and candidates, while procedural disputes and external pressures created additional complications that could result in governmental paralysis and community fragmentation during periods requiring rapid response to existential threats and strategic challenges. The resolution mechanisms that eventually enabled electoral conclusions included creative compromises and procedural innovations, while external developments and changing circumstances created opportunities for breakthrough agreements that preserved constitutional principles while adapting to unprecedented conditions and political requirements that demanded flexible responses to evolving strategic situations. The rise of Itzcoatl. The military credentials that qualified Itzcoatl for supreme leadership included decades of successful combat experience and strategic planning, while his record of battlefield achievements and tactical competence provided credible foundation for resistance policies that would require exceptional martial skills and comprehensive understanding of military operations under challenging conditions against superior enemies who possessed significant technological and numerical advantages. The political relationships that supported Itzcoatl's candidacy included alliances with key military commanders and influential nobles, while his network of personal loyalties and strategic partnerships provided essential foundation for governance during crisis periods, requiring maximum cooperation and collective commitment to shared objectives that would determine community survival and future prosperity within evolving regional political arrangements. The strategic vision that distinguished Itzcoatl's leadership approach included comprehensive analysis of regional power dynamics and alliance possibilities, while his understanding of Tepanek vulnerabilities and coalition warfare enabled development of realistic resistance strategies that could achieve Mexica independence through coordinated military campaigns and diplomatic initiatives serving broader objectives than mere tribal survival. The constitutional legitimacy that validated Itzcoatl's succession included proper electoral procedures and popular acceptance, while his selection through traditional mechanisms provided necessary legal and spiritual authority for implementing revolutionary policies that would fundamentally transform Mexica's political status and strategic relationships with other regional powers throughout the Valley of Mexico. The immediate policy priorities that shaped Itzcoatl's early governance included military mobilization and alliance building, while urgent preparations for potential Tepanek attack required rapid expansion of defensive capabilities and diplomatic coordination with other communities whose cooperation would be essential for successful resistance to Azcapotzalco's expected retaliation against rebellious tributary populations. The administrative reforms that enhanced governmental effectiveness during crisis conditions included streamlined decision-making procedures and improved coordination between military and civilian authorities, while institutional modifications enabled more efficient resource allocation and strategic planning that could support sustained resistance efforts and complex alliance management during extended periods of regional warfare. The diplomatic initiatives that sought external support for resistance policies included secret negotiations with other tributary communities and displaced rulers, while careful intelligence operations and propaganda campaigns worked to build anti-Tepanek coalitions that could provide mutual assistance and coordinated resistance against common enemies whose defeat would benefit all participants in regional liberation movements. The military preparations that strengthened Mexica's defensive capabilities included recruitment drives and training programs, while fortification projects and weapons production enhanced combat readiness and deterrent capabilities that could either discourage Tepanek attack or enable successful resistance if diplomatic initiatives failed to prevent armed confrontation with superior enemies seeking to maintain regional hegemony. The economic mobilization efforts that supported resistance policies included tribute reforms and resource allocation, while trade relationships and financial arrangements provided necessary funding for military expenses and alliance commitments that required substantial material resources for successful implementation of strategies designed to achieve political independence through sustained resistance and coalition warfare. The religious authorization ceremonies that legitimized revolutionary policies included divine consultation and ceremonial validation, while spiritual leaders provided cosmic sanction for resistance decisions and military campaigns that would fundamentally alter Mexica's political relationships and require supernatural protection for successful completion of extraordinary strategic objectives, serving community survival and cultural preservation. The propaganda campaigns that built popular support for resistance policies included appeals to historical precedents and cultural values, while emphasizing benefits of independence and dangers of continued subordination that motivated community commitment to difficult policies requiring personal sacrifice and collective cooperation during extended periods of uncertainty and potential hardship. The intelligence operations that provided strategic information for policy planning included espionage activities and diplomatic monitoring, while systematic collection of information about Tepanek capabilities and intentions enabled better strategic planning and tactical preparation for complex military and diplomatic campaigns, requiring accurate assessment of enemy strengths and vulnerabilities. The Alliance Revolution. The diplomatic breakthrough that transformed regional power dynamics occurred when Nezahualcóyotl of Texcoco agreed to join anti-Tepanec coalition, while his legitimate claims to regional leadership and sophisticated political network provided essential foundation for coordinated resistance that could challenge Azcapotzalco's hegemony through combined military capabilities and strategic cooperation between previously isolated tributary communities seeking independence from oppressive imperial control. The Triple Alliance formation that created new political arrangements included careful negotiation of authority, relationships, and resource sharing while establishing institutional frameworks for coordinated decision-making and mutual assistance that would enable effective coalition warfare against common enemies while preserving individual community autonomy and cultural traditions within collaborative political structures serving shared strategic objectives. The military coordination protocols that enabled effective joint operations included standardized communication procedures and command structures, while integrated planning and tactical coordination enhanced combat effectiveness of allied forces whose combined capabilities could challenge Tepanec military superiority through superior strategy and operational cooperation, compensating for individual community limitations in manpower and resources. The territorial arrangements that distributed conquered lands and tribute rights included equitable sharing formulas and administrative responsibilities, while negotiated settlement procedures ensured fair distribution of benefits from successful resistance campaigns and prevented conflicts between alliance partners whose cooperation would remain essential for long-term strategic success and continued regional stability. The constitutional innovations that adapted traditional governance to alliance requirements included modified electoral procedures and diplomatic protocols, while institutional adjustments enabled effective participation in coalitions, decision-making without compromising essential community autonomy and cultural integrity that provided foundations for continued political legitimacy and popular support during challenging alliance management. The strategic planning integration that coordinated individual community capability with collective objectives included comprehensive assessment of military resources and operational possibilities, while systematic analysis of enemy vulnerabilities and regional opportunities enabled development of realistic campaign plans that could achieve independence goals through achievable military and diplomatic initiatives. The economic cooperation arrangements that supported alliance activities included tribute sharing and resource pooling, while trade coordination and financial assistance enhanced collective capabilities for sustained resistance efforts and post-victory reconstruction that would require substantial material resources and economic planning for successful transition to independent political status. The intelligence sharing systems that enhanced strategic awareness included coordinated espionage networks and information analysis, while systematic collection and distribution of intelligence regarding enemy activities and capabilities enabled better tactical planning and strategic coordination between alliance partners whose success depended upon accurate understanding of regional developments. The diplomatic recognition initiatives that sought external validation for alliance legitimacy included appeals to regional powers and traditional authorities, while propaganda campaigns and ceremonial demonstrations established political credibility and moral authority that could attract additional supporters and discourage enemy alliance formation through successful projection of strength and determination. The conflict resolution mechanisms that managed alliance disputes included mediation procedures and arbitration systems, while institutional frameworks for addressing disagreements and competing interests preserved coalition unity despite inevitable tensions, competing priorities that could otherwise fragment cooperative relationships, essential for continued strategic effectiveness. The cultural exchange programs that strengthened alliance bonds included ceremonial cooperation and educational initiatives, while shared military training and administrative coordination enhanced mutual understanding and professional competence that supported effective collaboration during complex political and military operations requiring sustained commitment and coordinated effort. The succession planning procedures that ensured alliance continuity included institutional arrangements for leadership transitions and policy continuity, while constitutional frameworks preserved coalition effectiveness despite changing circumstances and evolving leadership that required adaptive responses to new challenges and opportunities within continuing strategic relationships. The constitutional legacy. The institutional innovations that emerged from successful crisis management included enhanced electoral procedures and emergency protocols, while strengthened constitutional frameworks provided improved mechanisms for handling future succession challenges and political crises that might threaten community stability and governmental effectiveness during periods of extraordinary stress and strategic uncertainty. The precedent establishment that guided future political development included documented procedures and decision-making, principles, while constitutional traditions preserved during crisis conditions provided foundations for continued democratic governance and institutional effectiveness that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential political legitimacy and popular support. The governmental modernization that resulted from crisis adaptation included administrative reforms and institutional improvements, while enhanced coordination between different branches of government created more effective policy implementation and strategic planning capabilities that could address complex challenges requiring sustained collective effort and sophisticated organizational competence. The democratic strengthening that enhanced popular participation included expanded consultation procedures and improved representation, while broader community involvement in political decision-making provided enhanced legitimacy and social support for governmental policies and strategic initiatives requiring high levels of popular cooperation and collective commitment to shared objectives. The alliance integration mechanisms that coordinated different political systems included diplomatics, protocols, and institutional arrangements, while standardized procedures for inter-community cooperation enhanced effectiveness of coalition governance and strategic coordination that would remain essential for continued independence and regional influence within evolving political circumstances. The military command structures that improved defense capabilities included integrated leadership and coordination systems, while enhanced professional competence and strategic planning provided superior military effectiveness and deterrent capabilities that could maintain independence and territorial security despite potential threats from hostile neighbors and ambitious regional powers. The economic management innovations that supported expanded political responsibilities included tribute administration and resource allocation, while improved financial systems and trade coordination enhanced community prosperity and strategic capabilities that provided foundations for continued independence and cultural development within competitive regional environment. The legal framework developments that strengthened constitutional governance included judicial procedures and regulatory mechanisms, while enhanced institutional arrangements for dispute resolution and policy implementation provided improved social order and collective cooperation that supported effective governance and community welfare during periods of rapid political and economic change. The educational institutional growth that preserved political knowledge included training programs and documentation systems, while systematic transmission of constitutional principles and governmental procedures ensured continuity of effective political leadership and institutional competence despite changing circumstances and evolving strategic requirements that demanded adaptive responses and creative solutions. The cultural preservation efforts that maintained traditional values within modified political structures included ceremonial continuity and symbolic authority, while adaptation of religious practices and social customs to changing circumstances preserved community identity and spiritual legitimacy that provided essential foundations for continued political cohesion and collective purpose. The international recognition achievements that established regional political status included diplomatic relationships and treaty arrangements, while successful demonstration of governmental competence and strategic capability earned respect and accommodation from foreign powers, whose recognition was essential for continued independence and regional influence. The historical documentation that preserved crisis experience for future reference included detailed records and analytical assessment, while systematic preservation of constitutional precedents and decision-making processes provided valuable guidance for future political leaders facing similar challenges and requiring institutional memory for effective response to extraordinary circumstances. Through the crucible of constitutional crisis that nearly destroyed Mexican political independence, the electoral system and governmental institutions demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptive capability, while the successful selection of Itzcoatl and formation of the Triple Alliance provided foundations for imperial expansion and regional dominance that would characterize Aztec political development throughout subsequent centuries. The legacy of the succession crisis thus revealed that effective institutional frameworks could survive extraordinary pressures while providing mechanisms for peaceful leadership transition and policy adaptation that served community survival and collective welfare, despite external threats and internal divisions that tested fundamental assumptions about political legitimacy and governmental effectiveness. In the end, the constitutional crisis that threatened to destroy Mexican independence instead catalyzed political evolution and institutional strengthening that enabled transformation from tributary status to imperial dominance, while demonstrating that democratic principles and constitutional governance could provide superior alternatives to authoritarian rule and military dictatorship during extraordinary circumstances requiring wisdom, courage, and collective commitment to shared values and strategic objectives.